On February 18, 2021, NASA's Perseverance rover enters the thin Martian atmosphere at a speed of nearly 13,000 miles per hour. The world holds its breath. The most complex and technologically advanced device in human history is preparing to touch the surface of the red planet. It lands in the Jezero crater, a place where, possibly, water once flowed and life may have originated. While the rover's cameras transmit the first clear images of an alien world, something unexpected lies hidden behind this entire mission. Neither C++ nor Java, but Python. Python is one of the most discussed programming languages in the world, and there are many reasons for that. For some, Python is an example of what a modern programming language should be: understandable, elegant, and convenient. For others, it is too simplified a tool that has spoiled an entire generation of developers. Yes, it is criticized for its slowness, but it is impossible to deny the obvious. Year after year, Python remains among the most popular programming languages. And the reason is simple. It was created so that writing code would be enjoyable, instead of cumbersome syntax clean code and strict indentation that replace curly braces. No need to declare variables in advance, no need to fight with the compiler. You just write the code and it works. That's why Python often becomes the first language with which beginners start their journey. But here's what's really interesting. Back in the 1980s, there was already the ABC language, in which the very ideas that made Python so convenient were already embodied. So why did one language become a legend, while the other remained just a footnote in the history textbooks of programming? Who exactly created Python? And most importantly, why is it called Python at all? Well, make yourself comfortable, and let's begin. Let's start with ABC, the direct predecessor of Python. This imperative language was created in the Netherlands in 1975. It was interactive, structured, and high-level. It was conceived as a replacement for languages such as BASIC, Pascal, and awk. Now I'll tell you about several key features of this language. They might seem familiar. First, ABC had only 5 basic data types. At the same time, declaring variables was not required. Nesting is indicated using indentation, not curly braces, as in most languages. It is a language with arbitrary precision and supports lists and strings of unlimited size. It already existed. The creators of ABC aim to give ordinary users such as physicists, linguists, economists the opportunity to write programs without deep knowledge of computer science. In the 70s, the language was actively taught in universities, helping people use large computing machines for their research. And yes, as you may have already guessed, ABC was born in the Netherlands, at the CWI Research Center. If you follow the history of technology, the name Andrew Tannenbaum is surely familiar to you. He is the creator of Minix, an educational operating system that played a huge role in the history of Linux. It was under his leadership that Guido van Rossum worked on another system, Amoeba, a distributed operating system that, to put it mildly, caused him quite a few headaches. The main problem for the young Guido was administration. Managing Amoeba through programs in C and standard shell scripts turned out to be extremely inconvenient. The system had its own set of calls that you simply couldn't reach from the shell. Guido needed a new scripting language, simple, flexible, and friendly, so that he could directly interact with Amoeba without crutches and dancing with a tambourine. Adapting ABC for this didn't work. The language simply didn't allow itself to be extended. This limitation pushed Guido toward the idea of creating a new language that would retain all the best from ABC, but at the same time would be open, extensible, and suitable not only for Amoeba, but for any tasks. So, during the Christmas holidays of 1989, having a little free time and probably a lot of coffee, Guido decided to bring his idea to life. Later, he recalled this moment in an interview. "I started writing, created a simple virtual machine, parser, and runtime. I implemented the parts of ABC that I liked. I used indentation instead of curly braces or begin blocks for grouping code. I added several powerful data types: dictionaries, lists, strings, and numbers. I took the ingredients of ABC and mixed them a little. That's how Python appeared. It really resembled ABC, but differed in details. Lists, dictionaries, and the way indentation worked were implemented differently, and the keywords were written in lowercase letters. Guido himself said that he never liked writing everything in caps, because it looked as if a cat was yelling at you. And finally, the most important thing: extensibility. I think my main contribution to Python is that I made it easily extensible. A BC didn't have that. Everything there was monolithic. Adding something new without expanding the development team was impossible. It was this desire to break the monolithic model of ABC that led to the birth of a language that forever changed programming. In 1990, Guido van Rossum, working alone, created the first versions of Python. When he presented the project at the CWI Research Center, his colleagues greeted the idea with enthusiasm. And right away, an important question arose before Guido: should Python be open? In the early 90s, when GitHub didn't exist and the concept of open source was just emerging, distributing code was not easy. To share his work, Guido van Rossum had to split the sources into 21 parts and manually upload them to Usenet, the prototype of modern forums and repositories. Releasing was an incredible ordeal, because Usenet was the only thing we had for releasing it. Usenet is a network, you could say, of bulletin boards. People wrote messages that spread around the world, and then groups were created to study various programming languages. When using it, there was a very strict limit on the size of a single post. First, put the entire source tree into an archive, then compress it. Then you apply another tool that splits it into pieces. Then there's a script in which, if you've uploaded all 21 parts, you can perform all these operations in reverse order. That's exactly what people put up with. Python began to be used and tested in the Amoeba system, where it showed increasingly impressive results. Feedback from colleagues helped Guido refine the language, adding new features and fixing minor bugs. And finally, in February 1991, he decided to make his code publicly available. That's how version 0.9.0 appeared. It was the one that marked the beginning of Python. But before moving on to the question that interests absolutely everyone, why is it called Python, let's briefly go over the main stages of its development. In the very first public version, 0.9.0, exception handling and class inheritance were already implemented, two key features without which it's hard to imagine Python today. Then, in version 1.0, elements of functional programming appeared, those very Lambda and other tools that still evoke nostalgia among Lisp fans. In 1994, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, chose Python for a number of research projects related to standardization. To use the language as efficiently as possible, the institute needed a specialist who knew Python thoroughly. And of course, it was impossible to find a better candidate than the creator himself. With NIST's support, Guido van Rossum got the opportunity to promote Python beyond the laboratories. He conducted workshops, gave lectures, and spoke at conferences. That's how new developers learned about Python. It was during this period that the first community began to form around the language. Soon, Guido received a new offer from the Corporation for National Research Initiatives, a non-profit organization engaged in the development of open technologies. This job allowed him to assemble a small team of developers and establish regular Python releases. Versions from 1.3 to 1.6 were created precisely within the framework of this partnership. The language got an official website, a mailing list system, and a permanent base of participants. Python gradually turned from a personal project into a full-fledged open-source movement. Since I was a systems programmer, I was responsible for creating python.org. We should have also registered python.com. Although we didn't consider Python a commercial project, someone else had already registered it and used it to host a silly porn site. For years, we had to warn people to go to python.org, not .com. By 2000, the language had noticeably grown stronger. Python acquired its own philosophy, the Zen of Python. 20 simple but precise rules that describe not only the language, but also the mindset of its community. This is not just a set of lines. This is the philosophy of code. This is the Zen of Python.
Beautiful is better than ugly. Explicit is better than implicit. Simple is better than complex. Complex is better than complicated. Flat is better than nested. Sparse is better than dense. Readability counts. Special cases aren't special enough to break the rules. Although practicality beats purity, error should never pass silently, unless explicitly silenced. In the face of ambiguity, refuse the temptation to guess.
Around the same time, Guido received the title BDFL, Benevolent Dictator for Life. In the context of free software development, this is a semi-humorous term denoting the head or founder of a project who retains the right to make final decisions. This term was first used in relation to Guido van Rossum, and the language itself began to be used even in the corporate environment. For example, Microsoft Merchant Server, which in the 90s was real recognition. In the fall of 2000, Python 2.0 was released, and the language took another step forward. Unicode support appeared, a full garbage collector, and the familiar list comprehensions to everyone. List comprehensions that came from functional languages like Haskell. Soon, two key frameworks appeared on the scene: Django and Flask. Django is a full-stack framework in Python, released in 2005. It was developed to simplify the creation of complex websites and applications with database support. It offered an all-in-one approach, providing developers with many built-in tools and functions. And Flask is a micro-framework that appeared in 2010. It was developed with minimal dependence on external libraries, giving developers flexibility in choosing architecture, database, plugins, and other components. However, by the end of the decade, it became clear. Over the years, too much technical debt had accumulated. A new version was needed that would clean the codebase and simplify development. That's how Python 3.0 appeared, and with it, the first serious test. The main problem turned out to be the transition. The language itself became better, but millions of libraries written for Python 2 required updates. Porting simple scripts caused no difficulties, but for large ecosystems it became a real challenge. Nevertheless, despite the painful migration process, Python 3 laid the foundation for the modern language as we know it today. People who sacrificed their time to port code to Python 3 ultimately made the whole world switch to Python 3. But as I already said, it took about 10 years. I don't think anyone expected how much work would be required for the transition to Python 3. I think Python is too big to ever survive such a transition. I never doubted my decision to switch to Python 3. It was a good lesson. For a long time, I regularly joked that there would be Python 4, but the transition would be much better than to Python 3. I felt I had to do it for the community. And now the mantra has changed. There will never be Python 4. As of today, the latest version is Python 3.14, released in October 2025, which has become one of the most notable in the language's history. The most discussed innovation is free threading. Now there are versions of the interpreter without the global interpreter lock, the very one that for decades did not allow executing multiple threads of Python code simultaneously. For many developers, this is a real turning point. No more need to come up with workarounds to parallelize tasks. Now multi-threading really works. Another interesting update is T-strings, template strings. In syntax, they resemble the familiar F strings to everyone, but are created as templates and allow safely inserting data without the risk of injections. This is especially useful when working with SQL queries, HTML pages, and other contexts where cleanliness and input security are important. And of course, speaking about Python, one cannot fail to mention one detail: its openness. From the very beginning, the language has been distributed under its own license, developed and supported by the Python Software Foundation. Although Python never used the GNU GPL license directly, almost all its versions are fully compatible with it. This compatibility has been preserved since 2001, starting with the release of Python 2, and remains unchanged to this day. And now the main question: why is Python called Python? The answer, as often happens, lies right in the official documentation. By the way, the language is named after the BBC show Monty Python's Flying Circus and has nothing to do with reptiles. Making references to anti-Python jokes in the documentation is not only allowed, but recommended. Guido van Rossum himself wrote in 1996, "I chose the name Python while in a slightly humorous mood. I was a big fan of Monty Python's Flying Circus." So, contrary to the common myth, the name has nothing to do with the snake. In fact, it refers to the cult British comedy troupe that gave the world such masterpieces as Life of Brian, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and of course, Monty Python's Flying Circus itself. Their humor has always been distinguished by its signature absurdity, cleverness, unexpectedness, and often a dose of social satire. If you haven't seen these films yet, I highly recommend them. Today, Python competes with Java and JavaScript, while remaining the friendliest language for beginners. Its strength lies in its simplicity, in the community, and in the thousands of libraries created by Pythonistas around the world.